12 and a half years when our kids were growing up, and then we left for 21 years, and we've been back there for almost 3 years. And if you ever need a really good speaker to come over here, you want to get Evan Smith, because he really does a good job. You can ask anybody in the commissary, who's the best preacher here, and they'll tell you, Evan Smith. Well, it's good to be with you here at Valley View. It's always good to come to this congregation. I do want to tell you that we're going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and so you might want to turn your Bible to 2 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, and we'll look at a few verses there in just a moment. I feel like we have some connections with this congregation. We have a connection with Spencer, and he actually was one of my students at Crowley's Ridge College a long time ago, because he's middle-aged now. And I know that there are a lot of people in southeast Missouri that believe that Valley View is just the luckiest congregation in the whole country to have him as its pulpit minister, and I think that they're right. I think the world of Spencer. He serves on our board over at the school and occasionally teaches a class for us, and it's just a pleasure to know Spencer and Melissa and their family, and I know that you're grateful to have them here at Valley View. Also, there are some other connections. Gail Holder was my roommate at Crowley's Ridge College more than 50 years ago, and I graduated from CRC with him and Brenda, and so we think the world of them. And Brenda, my wife, graduated from high school with Lyndall and Norma Turner over at South Pemscott in Steele, Missouri. They had their 50th anniversary of the graduation last year, and it was a pretty good gathering. I enjoyed being over there with them. And there are other connections too. On the way over here, Brenda said, well, there's 6 or 7 or 8 people at Valley View with whom I used to work. She retired from Crowley's Ridge Academy this year, and so it's people that she used to work with, not working now. But it's good to see all of you, and we're going to look at 2 Corinthians 4 here in just a moment. A little over 13 years ago, we sold our house out in the country where we'd lived for quite a long time and bought another house in town. And we had not been there very long before our air conditioner quit. And it just wore out. And so we had to buy a new air conditioner. The house was about 40 years old, and so it was not really a surprise. Later on, we had to get a new stove. And last year, Brenda decided that we needed to do a remodeling job. And so we did a remodeling job. I guess our house was wore out and needed to be redone. And it does look better. But things seemed to wear out. Last year, I traded off my car that I had driven for years. It had, I think, 220,000 miles on it. And I knew that it was time to get another one. And I don't know whether that little red car is still going up and down the road somewhere in northeast Arkansas. But someday, if it hasn't already, that little red car will wear out. Our watches, our microwaves, our carpet, our computers, our washers, our dishwashers, our radios, our light bulbs, our lawnmowers, our farm equipment, all those things wear out, don't they? You name it, it's going to wear out. Even the clothing on your back will wear out. It's amazing to me that the children of Israel, when they were in the wilderness for 40 years, had the blessing of their clothes not wearing out. That was something that God gave them. But I can't imagine wearing the same clothing for 40 years. They wear out. But there's something else that wears out, and that's our physical bodies. Can you relate to that? They wear out. And our bodies are incredible. We have 206 bones in our body. We have 60,000 miles of blood vessels, veins, arteries, and capillaries. The brain is the most complicated and sophisticated central processing unit ever devised. It controls over 100 billion cells, and at least 100,000 different chemical reactions take place in the brain every single second. Your brain can store, recognize, and remember 10,000 different odors and distinguish between up to 8 million different colors, 500 shades of gray. The heart beats 100,000 times a day, 40 million times a year, and in 70 years, the heart will beat 2.5 billion times. What that means is that my heart has beat more than 2.5 billion times. In 1 year, the heart circulates 770,000 to 1.6 million gallons of blood throughout the body. The blood travels 60,000 miles a day, 168 million miles in a lifetime. The body is incredible. And David put it quite well, didn't he, when he said that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, Psalm 139, verse 14. But our physical body was not made to live forever. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 50. It will wear out. You might have heard about the man that went to the doctor, and he said, "Doc, my left leg is really hurting. It's just killing me." And the doctor looked at him and said, "Well, it's just old age." He said, "How can that be? My right leg is just as old and it doesn't hurt." But I guarantee you that right leg will wear out too. Our bodies are wearing out. And this is exactly what the Apostle Paul says in the text that we're going to read from 2 Corinthians chapter 4. I want you to look at the last 3 verses in this chapter, beginning at verse 16 and going through verse 18, and I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. Paul said, "Therefore we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." Now, I'll have to admit to you that these verses mean more to me at this stage in my life than they did 30 or 40 years ago. It may not mean a whole lot to those of you that are younger, but if you're in my generation, and some of you are, then these verses probably mean a little bit more to you. The Apostle Paul said several things here. First of all, he said the outward man is perishing. Says that in verse 16. The NIV says the outward man is wasting away. And the New American Standard Bible, from which I just read, says that that outward man is decaying. Do you ever go to a reunion and the only person you recognize is you? I told you about Brenda's 50th reunion last year, and now she recognized Lyndall and Norma, but some of the others she didn't recognize. And I drink coffee with a guy in the morning that just went to his 40th class reunion, and he said, "There are 2 or 3 there that I didn't recognize." And we were looking at a picture that was on Facebook this morning, and he said, "I didn't know that person, I didn't know that person, I didn't know that person." Why? Because the outward man is decaying, it is perishing. I went to school with a young man at Crowley Ridge College that I actually knew before I ever came to school, because we were boys together in Idaho. And his father was a gospel preacher, and he baptized me. And we left CRC, and I had not seen him for years. And he was on our website one day, and he saw my name, and he called me. And he said, "I saw your name, and I wonder if we can get together sometime." And he was living down in the southern part of Arkansas, and I said, well, if I'm ever down that way, I'll call you. And I was going that way, and so I called him, and I said, hey, I'm going to be in your town. Are you going to be able to meet me? He said, yes. So we decided to meet at McDonald's, and I got there before he did. I ordered my coffee, and I sat down. I kept looking out the window, and I thought, am I going to recognize him? And a car pulled up, and this boy's father got out of the car. And he looked around, and then he walked into the restaurant, and I went over, and it wasn't his father. It was he. And he looked like his father, I hadn't seen him in 40 years, And the outward man changes. The outward man does perish. It does waste away. Have you ever taken a look at a picture that was taken of you years ago? Maybe you didn't even recognize yourself. I have some pictures in my office on the wall, and some of them are pretty old. And one of my students came in one day, and she looked at a picture of my family that was taken years and years ago, and she said, well, I didn't know you used to have black hair. I said, well, it would still be black if I didn't highlight it. But we do change, don't we? And we try to prevent the inevitable, with cosmetics, plastic surgery. It is said that $10 million, or $10 billion rather, are spent every year on plastic surgery in the United States. We take medicine. I never thought in my entire life that I would take as much medicine as I take every morning and every night. Some people wear wigs, they color their hair, but we try to do everything we can to prevent the inevitable from happening. Maybe you heard of a man named Ponce de Leon. Ponce de Leon is a man about whom you read in the history books. He heard that there was a fountain of youth somewhere in Florida, and the rumor said that if you went to that fountain and you drank the water from it, you'd remain young forever. And Ponce de Leon thought that maybe he could find that fountain, and he spent a long time looking for it, but he never did find it, because you see, such a fountain does not exist. Someday we're all going to die. Ponce de Leon did. Now, you are closer to death right now than you've ever been. I had surgery a few years ago, and Brenda told me probably 2 or 3 years after I'd had that surgery that the doctor told her, your husband almost died. I said, well, thanks for telling me, I didn't realize I was that bad off, but he told her, your husband almost died. But you know something? I'm closer to death right now than I ever have been. And I don't care I do care, but regardless of whatever has happened to you, whatever sickness you've had, whatever accident you've suffered, whatever situation you found yourself in, right now you are closer to death than you've ever been. Someday we're going to die, aren't we? It's appointed unto men once to die, and after this the judgment, Hebrews 9:27. And Solomon said there is an event that happens to us all, Ecclesiastes 2:14, and he was talking about death. It's going to happen to every one of us. There's just no way to escape it. Some are going to be living at the time the Lord returns, and apparently they won't die, according to 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4. But unless you're living at the time the Lord comes back, then someday you're going to die. That outward man is perishing. That's the first point that Paul makes in this passage of Scripture. The second thing he says is also there in verse 16. He said, therefore we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, look at the next phrase there, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. That inward man is being renewed. The very things that weaken this body may actually strengthen your soul. It was Carl Wilson Baker that said, let me grow lovely growing old. The Christian's view of life is different from that of the worldview. The worldview is this: life is a slide down a hill. The Christian view is life is a climb up the hill. The older you get, the weaker you get, because that outer man is wasting away. I like to play ping pong, and I play a pretty good game of ping pong. And through the years, I've enjoyed playing some of the students, showing them how good I am, And in recent years, the students have improved. I mean, we have some students that are really good at it, and they're a lot better than those students we had a few years ago. And I got thinking about it, well, maybe they're not any better. Maybe you've just gone downhill a little bit. And I imagine that that's so. The older you get, the weaker you get. But the same should not be true spiritually. The older you get, spiritually, the stronger you should get. When you are older, you should be closer to God than you've ever been, because you've had a whole life to grow in that direction, to mature, to learn lessons that maybe you couldn't have learned when you were younger. You pick out, and you might want to do this later, you might want to take a piece of paper and write down some spiritual giants that you know. Men and women whose lives are characterized by strong faith in the living God. People that are totally committed to the cause of Christ. People whose lives are patterned after Jesus Christ. You make a list of those people, and then you go over that list after you've made the list, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if most of them on that list are among the older ones in the community, because they've had an opportunity to grow. Isn't it wonderful when you see a young person who becomes stronger spiritually as time passes? We have a nephew, and you know, I don't know if I'd have given a nickel for you know, for the hope of him turning out to be anything worthwhile when he got older. He was really a rascal, and he lives in Alaska, and I've just been to Alaska, and I think he'd be 40 years old his next birthday, and I just remember kind of how rebellious he used to be, and you know, he would sass others, you know, and he just didn't seem like he was going in the right direction at all. And in a congregation where he's a member, he'll lead singing, and when the preacher's gone, he'll get up and preach. He works with the young people there, just totally committed to the Lord. Well, what's happened through the years is he's matured, and he's learned lessons that have helped him get closer to God, and it's just a wonderful thing to see. I know we have students that come to school, and maybe we don't see them for a while, and then maybe we're out in a congregation somewhere where they are years later, and you just see how they have progressed, and it's a wonderful thing to see. And so the outward man is perishing, but that inward man is being renewed day by day, getting stronger and stronger. Now let me say something. If you've been around a while and you're not getting stronger, you're not getting closer to God, you're not becoming more mature, then something's wrong. Step back, you know, talk to someone, spend some time in the book, spend some time praying, because you actually should be getting stronger as the years go by. So point number one, the outward man is perishing. Point number two, the inward man is being renewed. And then point number three, our afflictions are temporary. The NIV and the NASB says momentary. Now, man often thinks only of the present, the here and now. That was Eve's problem, wasn't it? You know, she saw that fruit and she wanted it. She wanted it right then, and she couldn't think about the future. She only thought about the present. That was Judas's problem, wasn't it? He could only think of the present, you know. He couldn't think of the consequences of his action. And then there's Esau that wanted that stew that his brother had made, you know, and he could only think of right now. He couldn't think of the future, and he gave up his birthright as a result of that. Now, Moses was different. It says, by faith, Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to live in sin. Hebrews 11 and verse 25. And he was different. Now, pleasures in life are temporary, you know. If you like a special kind of food and you say, well, I just can't wait to eat that steak, you know, and you eat it and you're full, but you know you're going to get hungry again. Once we pursue a pleasure, we have to repeat that pleasure in order to get any good out of it at all. And so the pleasures of sin are temporary. The afflictions of life are temporary. And you know, we need to understand that. Now, think about this a moment. The blind, and maybe you know someone's blind, or maybe someone here is blind, I don't know. The blind are temporarily blind. The deaf are temporarily deaf. Whatever ailment you have is temporary. You have arthritis, welcome to the club. But I guarantee it's only temporary. You have a heart problem, it's a temporary problem. You have that dreaded disease called cancer, it's a temporary disease. Christians have to look at those things in that way, because these afflictions are just temporary. Well, how can we see this? Well, it has to be through the eye of faith. We're told that Christians have a peace that passes understanding, Philippians 4 and verse 7. It's a peace that the world can't understand, they can't see, but Christians can see it, and they can understand it if they'll look at it through faith. And so we find the Apostle Paul saying here that the outward man is perishing, inward man is being renewed, and our afflictions are temporary. They're not going to last forever. Now, the fourth point that I want you to look at is that things are going to be better over there. Look at verses 17 and 18. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Earth's sufferings are going to be forgotten in heaven. No tears there, no death. Revelation 21 and verse 4, no pain. Now, I don't know anything about a woman's pain in childbirth. And I remember when our oldest daughter was born, 46 years ago, Brenda was in labor for a long time. And when she found out that our newborn baby was a girl, she said the first thought that came to her mind was, oh no, someday she's going to have a baby and experience this pain too, But I think that after she held Tara in her arms, that she forgot all that pain. At least I'm speaking for her, but I think that that's true. We had two more. When I dream of my dad died in 1993. I only think of the good things. And my dad was sick for quite a while. I don't think of the times that he suffered and the trips that we had to make to the hospital. And I don't think of that last month that we were in the hospital there and what he had to go through. I really don't. I think of the good times. I think of the times that we went hunting and fishing, I think of the times that we made trips. My dad and mom loved to travel. And I think of the times that we had picnics. And I think of those times. I think of the time that he came down the aisle and became a child of God at the age of 58. Those are the things I think about. I don't think about the negative things. When Abel... By the way, I want to say something about my dad before I mention Abel here. We sang that song, There's Not a Friend Like the Lowly Jesus. The songbook that we had whenever I was a kid was a Christian hymn number 2. You might have had that songbook. Number 1 was Trust and Obey, if you had that songbook. Number 4 was the song that we sang, There's Not a Friend Like the Lowly Jesus. My dad said that was the earliest song that he could remember. He said he could remember them singing that in church when he was 4 years old. My dad was born in 1903, and so that would have been 1907. And so I thought, well, I'm going to look up that song and see when it was written. It was written in 1895, and so they were singing it in church when it was only 12 years old. Probably some of the people in church said, well, that's one of those newfangled songs, and we don't like it, But anyway, I think of that every time I hear the song, and I love the song because my dad loved the song. Okay, that's that's enough about him. Things are going to be better over there. I believe that my father and my mother are in heaven. Brenda's lost both her parents in the last 2 years. We believe that they're there, and that any suffering that they had to go through, it's all in the past. Things will be better over there. We have a guarantee from the Word of God. When Abel got over there, I doubt that he thought of the pain of being murdered by his own brother. What do you think? When Noah got over there, I doubt that he thought of the long years of laboriously working on that ark and the many hours of preaching to an unbelieving world. The Bible says that he was a preacher of righteousness, 2 Peter 2, verse 5. I just imagine that he wasn't thinking about those things when he got there. And when Moses got over there, I doubt that he thought of the 40 years of leading an ungrateful and rebellious people through the wilderness. I just don't think that they thought of those things. And I think when we get over there, we're not going to think of those things either. But you know, we need to be aiming for that home in heaven. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where rust and moth corrupt and where thieves break through and steal, but rather lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not corrupt and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Matthew 6:19 through 21. Now, let me ask you a question. Now, these 4 points here that are given in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. The outward man is decaying. If you're like me and you're 70 years old, you know that. The inward man is being renewed. You know, that's the second point that we want to make here. And then the afflictions that we suffer in this life are temporary. And then point number 4, things are going to be better over there. The question I want to ask you tonight as we close this lesson is this. Is your body, this body that's going to wear out, this body that's decaying, is it ready for eternity? You don't go to eternity with this body, do you? I've thought about this a little bit, and you know, it bothers me that some people are going to lose their soul. Does it bother you? It bothers me that, according to the Bible, more people are going to lose their soul than those that are going to be saved. Why can't these people go to heaven? I used to be a runner, and I'd run 30 or 40 miles a week, even ran a marathon one time, 26.2 miles, and ran a lot of shorter races. What if I looked in the paper, Jonesboro Sun tomorrow, and looked at the sports page, and it said, they're going to have a marathon this weekend. And so I tell Brandon, I'm going to go, sign up for that marathon. And I sign up for the marathon, I go down there and I get on the starting line, and how long do you think I'm going to last? I'm not going to last very long because I haven't been running. I walk, but I don't run. I couldn't enter that marathon race because this body wouldn't be ready for it. But you have another body, a spiritual body. And what are you doing to prepare that body for eternity? It's not that God doesn't want you in heaven. He does. He's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. 2 Peter 3, verse 9. He wants everyone to be saved. But if you come to eternity and you pass through the door of death and you got a body that's not ready, you can't go. And so that's why it's so important, realizing that this outward man is decaying. We got to work on the inward man to make sure that it's renewed day by day. Realize that these afflictions that we have are temporary. Things will be better over there if we made proper preparation here. And so I think those of you that are in my generation, you probably thought about these things and maybe taken appropriate action to get things ready. If you're younger, I hope that you'll think about these verses and realize that it's going to get here a lot quicker than you ever dreamed it would. Make preparation while you have time. Thank you so much for your attention.
If you will, let's stand singing the 470. If someone needs to come forward, let's do that.